Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Awinagwis Talking. If this is your first time around, welcome to the show, and welcome to today's episode where we are going to be diving into talking a bit about protected areas, particularly in BC, and then from there we might expand onto all of Canada, maybe even the States if we have some time. But I'm mainly going to focus on protected areas within BC, as well as forestry and how that kind of relates to each other. You know, forestry and protected areas. A lot of our protected areas within BC are in fact forest. You know, a lot of them are parks, whether they're provincial parks or national parks. Now, being here on Vancouver Island, we have a finite and what feels quite limiting in terms of the amount of natural resources and land that we have to use. If we use up all the land that's on the island, we're not going to have any forest or natural habitat or just places and sites to enjoy. Something that I've always found growing up here on Vancouver Island is when I go to Vancouver or I go to the mainland, I find myself very disconnected because as far as I've gone, it's been all the big city buildings in Vancouver, Richmond, Surrey, Langley. And then you go further and you go into the interior towards Kelowna. And as you're going along the highway, you just end up seeing a lot of floodplains, farm fields, and it just doesn't feel the same, especially with agriculture. The way that I view agriculture here on Vancouver Island, growing up in the Comox Valley, I find that it really is difficult to look at a farm and go, wow, that's amazing. Because also coming with a indigenous perspective, it's difficult to look at home territory and go, wow, what a great farm, something that my ancestors never had. So, you know, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about a bit more. What I do want to start out with is this map that I found. It's from the British Columbia government website. Now, what you can see here is I'll press play again, but what you can see here for our audio listeners, it's a map that shows the total protected area over time and the trends in the protection of British Columbia's terrestrial ecoregions from 1886 to 2015. So this is the most recent visual that we can get up to 2015. Now it is quite out of date. There's more protected areas since then, since 2015, because of course it's 2023, almost 2024. It's Boxing Day. So happy holidays, everyone. If you are listening to this in the new year, happy new year. Um, so we have a look at this. And the fun of it is, play. Okay. So the protected areas start out slow and then they slowly creep in and they fade in and they fade in and they fade in and they fade. Oh, there's more. There's more. It starts in southern BC and it makes its way north. Now, one of the 100% designated protected areas is in like the very north of BC. This is the St. Elias Mountains and the Chugach Mountains and ice fields are 99.7% protected. We come down to Vancouver Island. Eastern Vancouver Island only has 13.1% protected or designated as a terrestrial ecoregion that's protected. We go to Georgia Puget Sound Basin, only 9.9%. Western Vancouver Island, 13.9%, all the way from what looks like Point Renfrew all the way up to northern Vancouver Island and even towards the East Coast. I don't know how you could call the East Coast Western, but I guess you can. That's the way that they've laid out the ecoregions for this data. We come down here and we see a graph that slowly rises. And as we scroll along this graph, the map corresponds with the data. Now, one of the craziest things is that it's not until the early 1900s, so 1940, 1938 is where we start to see this spike in protected areas. And as of 2015, this data states that there is a total area of 947,654 square kilometers of protected area. That sounds great, doesn't it? Map above from 2015 is a map of protected lands and waters in BC. Now, besides just terrestrial protected areas, we also have marine protected areas. These might be marine protected areas or protected conservancy areas. Might be a rockfish conservation area. It might be very sensitive salmonid habitat. There's all different things that it can be. Um, According to this data, and according to um, the projections from this 2015 data, it states here that British Columbia's network of protected lands and waters contribute to the global and Canadian targets to set aside by 2020, so 3 years ago, at least 17% of terrestrial areas and inland water and 10% of coastal and marine areas through the networks of protected areas and other effective area based conservation measures. That was a lot to unpack. What I interpret that as is that by 2020, they plan to have at least 17%, as well as a 10%. So overall, a 27% protected areas. Um, not very, not very great. I mean, looking at the visual, this overall map here is not, it's not overwhelming. It's not, doesn't really satisfy much. You see these little blobs of green, tiny, tiny little blobs, which is a large amount of landmass. However, in regards to just BC, that doesn't feel fair. And I mean, even more so due to the fact that here in BC, we kind of face all of it because we have good forests. So we have a lot of forestry. Most of Canada's forestry comes from BC, next to all of it, basically, right? As well as the commercial fishing and shellfish industry is big here in BC, and the mining. You know, mining happens across Canada, but it also happens in BC. So what we're seeing is this sort of overflow of resource use or management, if that's the way you want to look at it. Then through agriculture, we also have things like runoff, and we have all these negative effects. We have drought that affects everyone, and we have farmers refusing to um, either cut their water supply for the time being or to at least lessen it to a fair use amount. Here in the Comox Valley, we have lived through quite a few water restrictions due to higher temperature summers, where it first starts out as you can only water your lawn on these days, and then it goes to you can only water your lawn for a little bit or garden or whatever. And then it gets to a point where it like mainly restricts water usage outside of like drinking water and cooking. Um, but when it comes to like watering your lawn and keeping it green in the summer, it's going to return and be green in the fall. So I personally do not entirely understand why people water their lawn in the middle of summer. I do understand the appeal to having a green lawn, but it just doesn't seem fair to everyone else when we all have our water coming from the same supply in Comox Lake. So continuing on here to the main part of this page, we also have the Beck system. So the biogeoclimatic, or the yeah, the biogeoclimatic zones, and then Beck is biogeoclimatic ecosystem classification system. Um, Pretty well the same thing. Now, protected lands are not evenly distributed amongst British Columbia's ecosystems, according to the website. High elevation and mountainous areas such as spruce, willow, birch, boreal, atai, uh, fescue, fescue alpine, fescue alpine. I've never seen that name. And interior mountain heather alpine zones have more than the provincial average protected. Low elevation, warm bottom areas tend to be underrepresented. So, from what I understand from that, is that the like where we live is not as protected as where we don't live, which is fair because who protects where we live? Well, it's mainly enforcement. It's the RCMP, it's local police, it's your neighbors, it's your family, it's your pets at times. And, in terms of like a generalization of the term protected, right? What we're talking about here is land mass and, in this case, marine as well. So, protected areas cover 3.2% of BC's coastal and marine areas. So that's a little off what we're wanting to look at here. Um, there's, of course, all their sources and data if you want to look at it more. Something that I find interesting is this article here from January, so almost a year ago, but it states from CBC. The title is BC Valley of Ancient Trees, Rare Animals Preserved in Deal with Forest Firm. So, a forest giant, Interfor Corp, to give up 75,000 hectares of its tenure in the in the Incomapalooks Valley. So, a valley of intact forest, lakes, and wetlands in southeastern British Columbia, nearly 200 times the size of Vancouver's Stanley Park, is being preserved in an agreement with governments, Indigenous groups, and forest companies and Nature Conservancy of Canada. So they're looking to, east of Revelstoke, protect a large amount of land. So according to this, it states 75,000. So the valley is a rare inland temperate rainforest with substantial areas of mature and old growth trees, some ranging from 800 to 1500 years. Now, by definition, old growth trees along the coast are defined as a tree that is 250 years or older. In the interior of BC, it's defined as being old growth when it is only 140 years or older. The size of the tree doesn't necessarily depict whether it's old growth or not. So just keep that in mind. However, this range is well above both of those, 800 on the low end and 1500 on the high end. So it states here that the forest also supports hundreds of lichen species, some that are new to science. So they've been around for a while, but scientists and biologists have come to conclude that they're new, haven't seen them before. And it provides habitat for grizzly and black bears, as well as endangered fungal and plant species, according to the government. The Nature Conservancy states that several species at risk are found in the valley, including two endangered bats and threatened southern mountain caribou. So, southern mountain caribou would be I guess, like a population, that's threatened. Mind you, it could be defined as a subspecies. I don't know my caribou too well, but yeah, that isn't good. Caribou, quite important. Quite a few people do hunt caribou, and I've heard in some areas at times like they are hunted even though their populations are nearly extirpated and or don't exist in certain areas. Um, but that's due to management areas of hunting. Um, that's definitely not the animal's fault. It's more a human error. And so, this unique temperate ecosystem is the northern edge of the project. Uh, it butts up against the Glacier National Park, which the Conservancy says increases the important habitat for wide ranging animals across the southern interior BC Mountains. So, all that's saying is that it's just creating more habitat for a good amount of animals. So, the BC government said the Conservancy covers almost 59,000 hectares, while another 17,000 hectares of forest in the southern part of the valley will be protected from logging, not for, from. So the environment minister, George Heyman, told a group that gathered for the announcement of the legislature that the area is one of the few temperate rainforests in the world. It's a unique part of the province, he states. So, like, this is a very interesting read because you're not just taking in um, just the growth that can happen by letting an ecosystem be an ecosystem, but you're also understanding the complexities that might happen. So it does come down to community. Premier David Eby said the valley is one of BC's greatest treasures, home to old growth cedars and hemlocks that are 4 meters in diameter. So those are pretty big trees in terms of size. In terms of protection of forests, I don't have a super solid standing. It's tricky though because with growing up in the Comox Valley, I grew up seeing cuplocks all the time and could see them clear as day, clear cuts. And I learned recently that clear cuts are slowly, but most certainly being phased out. It's not something that the government or forest companies or forest policymakers want to keep doing because visually it just doesn't look good. But more select cuts or um, shelter stands or like there's many methods to help um, have a mixed age growth within a cut block or an ecosystem. A more natural ecosystem is going to have more of a mixed growth of trees. By that, I mean the trees are going to vary in age and size. Where you might have 900-year-old trees, you might also have 70-year-old trees. And anything in between, older and younger than that range. So, what we have is then this organic and real ecosystem. And when I say real, I don't mean that lightly. I mean it in the sense of like an ecosystem is supposed to work together. Systems are a way for everything to function together and individually. When we talk about systems, we're talking about cars. You know, when you think about a car, what systems does a car need to work? Well, you need an engine, you need fuel, there's all these things that you need. So you go to the gas station, you get gas. Well, what happens if you get into a car accident? There's a system in place for that. It's called insurance. There's all these things that you're able to do that you weren't able to do before. So just a couple of quotes here to end off this article. The protection comes after decades of threats to the income Aplex River Valley, including an independent power project and several attempts to log the remaining ancient forest, the group says in a news release. In 2005, a landslide occurred in the valley in the canyon, halting logging operations and making the road impassable. So it's a really good way to look at the historical treatment and growth and change of that ecosystem in that valley in the canyon. It's quite important because it doesn't just gloss over the fact that, oh, this ecosystem has been doing pretty good. I mean, talk about a landslide. You're talking about trees coming down, animal habitat being destroyed. Like, it's a lot of times at this point too, people's houses get destroyed. People lose their lives. It's much more than the environmental or economic issues. It becomes more of a social issue with, as we talked in last episodes about wildfires. You know, we had a wildfire rip through Lillooet, destroying basically the entire town. Many people lost their homes. So, it can be quite, um, devastating. And that's kind of where I feel our values need to go, is pull back a bit to the human of it to balance out the economic, um, for lack of a better term, strength that is there. When the economic value is the highest consideration, um, that's where you run into issues, and that's part of the reason why I brought up this article, uh, from the 5th of this month, December 5th, 2023. So, Global News states BC moves to reduce raw log exports, boost higher value wood manufacturing. So, apparently, BC is moving to reduce the export of raw logs harvested in the province by requiring that a certain type of lumber from the interior undergo manufacturing first. The statement from the Forest Ministry says, changes to BC lumber regulations will require mills to fully manufacture lumber from cedar and cypress trees, producing items such as wood veneer, moldings, shingles, siding, floor, and fencing. Existing regulations will allow minimally processed cedar and cypress to be exported from the interior without further manufacturing. The government says the amendment is set to cut that practice and will take effect in February. So, this is a pretty quick turnaround in terms of export requirements. It says that an exemption must be obtained to export wood products that do not meet the specifications, such as logs and fee in lieu of manufacturing paid to the province. The Independent Wood Processors Association of BC welcomed the changes, saying in a statement that restricting raw lumber exports will create opportunities for higher value manufacturing and keep more forestry jobs in the province. So, in the mandate letter from Forest Minister Bruce Ralston, Premier David Eby, oh, this dude's like kind of important. Premier David Eby, wait, who is this actually? Wait, is this the guy who replaced Horgan? Hold on, just side note here. David Eby. He's the premier of British Columbia. Yeah, he's NDP. Okay. Sorry for that side note there. I realized I didn't know who our premier was for a quick sec. I was still thinking John Horgan, but Horgan left. Um, anyways, back to the article. In so in the mandate letter to the forest minister, the premier of BC said the unchecked export of raw logs was among issues requiring change to ensure BC's forest industry is sustainable. So the government statement released Monday, so I guess a few days before this article, says that the change in the interior builds on previous amendments that require Western red cedar and cypress, also known as yellow cedar, to fully be manufactured before export from coastal areas. The region updates support work already underway to get more value from every tree harvested by strengthening the wood manufacturing industry, it states. In the coastal region, these export requirements have reduced the volume of minimally processed cedar leaving the province. So that's, I mean, that's really good for manufacturing. My take on it is it might mean higher taxes for some. I don't know who. Or maybe it's taxes simply on the forestry companies or processors, manufacturers. Um, I don't know enough about forestry or milling to give any solid input. But from an Indigenous point of view, which ultimately at the end of the day is just my perspective, but the way that I was taught to look at our natural resources, aka nature, is just we exist with it and it exists with us. We are the ones who cannot survive without it. If we were to all disappear tomorrow, the planet would do way better without us. The planet does not need us. We need it. Where do we go when we need food? Well, either we go hunting or, to the grocery store to do a bit more simple hunting, pay money, you know. You fill your freezer with beef from a cow that you never even knew. But when we go hunting out and about for a deer, an elk, caribou, moose, we go fishing, you know, when we go and harvest plants, when we have our own gardens, when we have food sovereignty, and self sustaining ourselves, that's when the real magic happens. And when it comes to forestry, trees take quite a while to grow, which I think is why at this point it is becoming more and more of a difficult resource to manage. Because what our province, the people, the government, different people are coming to realize that we don't have 100 years to wait for a tree to reach a marketable size. Now, with the size, is it also how straight the tree is? Is there curves? How many knots is there? Mind you, it doesn't matter how slender or wide in diameter a tree is. Some of the most slender trees are worth quite a bit, just due to timber costs and things that can become pulp and paper and particle board and the simpler things in life that we need. Um, and I'm not against like having like paper. I'm more so conflicted by the way that forestry is managed. Forestry does not feel respectful in regards to the ecosystem part of it. We manage mostly the resource, the revenue, within our own lifetime. So you're looking at a career of maybe 40, 50 years, on average. And within those years that you're a forester of some sort, whether you're in policy or you're cutting down the trees, you're a faller, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of different jobs that forestry people have, but like whatever job you have, you're impacting the ecosystem just as much as the, you know, person next to you. Um, the most important step is the start, is the planning. You have your site plans, you have your tenure plans, you have how long the project's going to last, you have how big the area is, you have what trees you're going to leave, what trees you're going to cut down. Where's your buffer zone around streams? Does there need to be a buffer zone according to your own forestry regulations? That's another issue because although one stream might be defined as not salmon or fish bearing, does not mean that that stream does not lead down to another stream that is fish bearing. When it comes to turbidity and debris, it all flows downstream, flows downriver to a certain degree. And what you're actually doing in turn is messing up the larger watershed. It doesn't benefit the fish, it doesn't benefit us. The only thing that benefits us is the trees. Um, but if we're not managing our resources together, all as one, and the connectivity that fish and bears and trees all have, right? Like that one old growth article had stated, um, very important habitat for grizzly and black bears, as well as a endangered caribou species of sorts, and bats. Animals that you don't really think about, like bats. They are a species of concern, and they're at risk. They're endangered in that area of the um, of BC. So those are just some of my thoughts around forestry. If there's any topics you'd like me to cover, you can get a hold of me on my Instagram page at AW_talking. I believe that's my Instagram page. I say I believe. I made it not that long ago. Yeah, so that's that's correct. You can reach me at AW_talking. So AW like Awinagwis, but I didn't want to type out Awinagwis because I figured, well, that's too hard for people to remember to spell. And yeah, give me a follow if you haven't already, and shoot me a message asking me questions. And I hope to at some point do a Q&A, and very soon hope to have a guest on the show. So thank you all very much for having a listen and having a watch in video form. And I will see y'all in the next episode. Peace out.